Twitter fortune here. So in this video, I'm going to run through the cardiac cycle phases. Okay, so I'm going to run through all the phases of the cardiac cycle. So before I do that, let me remind you of the electric conductivity pathway or the heart. Okay, so it all starts from the AC node. So you have depolarization on the SA node there. Okay, so from the SA node, there's depolarization on the SA node. Depolarization moves to the AV node to the internodal pathway. Okay, so it goes to the AV node. From the AV node, it goes to the AV bundle there. Okay, then the AV bundle will branch, okay, into bundle branches there. Bundle branches. Okay. Then from there, depolarization will spread to the apex of the heart to the Purkinje fibers. Okay, so you have the Purkinje fibers there. That's where depolarization will spread to the apex of the heart like that. Okay, so this is the electric conductivity of the heart, the pathway. Okay, so now let's now go through the phases of the cardiac cycle. Okay, so we'll go through all the 5 phases one by one and see what happens in each phase. Okay, so let's do that right now. Okay, so there are actually 5 phases of the cardiac cycle. So before I start those 5 phases, I want you to understand these two terms. Okay, so there's what we call systole. So when we say systole, it means that we are in the period of contraction. Okay, period of contraction. That's systole. Period of contraction. Okay, then there is what we call diastole. Okay, diastole. When we say diastole, we mean we are in the period of relaxation. Okay, so you have to understand these two terms. Okay, so now let's go through the phases now in J. Okay, so there are actually 5 phases. The first phase is going to be, okay, so we have phase number 1, which is going to be called the resting phase. Okay, so phase 1 is going to be the resting phase. Resting phase. So what do we have in the resting phase? Okay, so in this phase, you have both the atria and the ventricles are in what? In diastole. Okay, so by now you have to understand what diastole means. We said it means the period of relaxation. So in this phase, phase 1, and in the resting phase, both the atria and the ventricles, they are in the period of relaxation. So they are in diastole. Okay, that's what you have there. Okay? The other thing you have to know that blood will start feeding both the ventricles and the atria. So blood feeding, okay, so blood will feeding both the ventricles and the atria. Okay, so blood will start entering both the ventricles and the atria. So that's what you are having. Okay, so this is due to pressure conditions. Okay, so due to pressure conditions, you have blood entering or feeding in both the ventricles and the atria. Okay, so that's what you have in phase 1. So remember, the atria and the ventricles, they are in diastole, they are relaxed. Blood is able to enter in both the ventricles and the atria. okay, due to that those pressure conditions. Okay, so that's what is happening in phase one. Let's now go to phase two. Let's see what is happening in phase two. Okay, so what do we have in phase two? So phase two, so phase two is going to be called the atrial systole. Okay, so going to be called the atrial systole. So what is happening here in this phase, in the atrial systole? What do we have? Okay, so systole, by the word systole, by now you know, means you have a period of contraction. Okay, so in this phase you have the atria contracting. Okay, so the atria is undergoing contraction. Okay, so atria is undergoing contraction. So contraction. So why is this atria undergoing under contraction? Okay, so you want to feed in the ventricles. So you want to squeeze all the blood from the atria, then goes to the ventricles. Okay, that is what is happening in phase two. So in phase two, you have atrial systole, atrial contraction, where the atria is contracting to feed in the ventricle so that all the blood is pushed into the ventricles. Okay, so that is what is happening in phase two. Okay, so let's go to phase three. Okay, so we go to phase three and see what is happening in phase three. Okay, so phase three is going to be called the isovolumetric. So isovolumetric ventricular contraction. So volumetric ventricular contraction. Okay, so what is happening in this phase? Okay, so what do we have in this case? So remember in phase two, we have the atrial systole, the atrial contraction. We've squeezed all the blood into the ventricles. Okay, so now we have a lot of pressure in the ventricles. Okay, so one of the things we are going to find in this phase, there's increase in pressure in the ventricles. Okay, there's too much pressure in the ventricles. Okay, so there's too much pressure in the ventricles. Because of that pressure in the ventricles, blood can go back to the atria. Okay, so you want to prevent that. So what do? You close your AV valves. Okay, so remember there are those atrioventricular valves. So they are going to close. So they will be closure of the AV valves. Okay, so AV valve close. Okay. So that's what you are going to have. So you are closing these AV valves to prevent the backflow of blood to the atria. Okay, so that's what you're having because of that pressure which is in the ventricles. Okay, so now because of that closure of the AV valve, okay, you are going to hear your first heart sound. Okay, so you're going to hear your first heart sound, which is also known as the lap. Okay, the lap. Okay, so that's what you are going to have in phase three. Okay, so what else is going to happen here? So your atria will relax. Okay, so your atria will relax. So atria will undergo diastole. Okay. Okay, so your atria will relax. Okay, so what else are we going to have here? So there will be no blood flow as the semilunar valves are closed as well. Okay, so you don't want your blood to leave the ventricles. So also your semilunar valves are also closed. Okay, so that the blood will be just in the ventricles there. Okay, so there's also closure. Okay, closure of semilunar valves. Okay. So at this period, there is no blood flow. So blood is just in the ventricles there, okay? Because both the semilunar valves and the AV valves are closed. So blood will remain in the ventricles like that, okay? So that is what is happening in phase 3 of your cardiac cycle, okay? So let's go to phase 4, okay? Let's go to phase 4. So phase 4, so phase 4 is going to be called the ventricular ejection. Okay, ventricular ejection. So what is happening in here? Okay, so remember we had too much pressure in the ventricles. All the blood is in the ventricles. The AV valves are closed. Okay, now also the semilunar valves are closed. Okay, so now what is going to happen here? You are going to see the semilunar valves being opened now. Okay, so the semilunar valves will open. Okay, so there's opening of the semilunar valve. Okay, so this is due to increased there's an increase in intraventricular pressure. Remember, okay, we mentioned in phase 3 that there's too much pressure in the ventricles, okay? So because of this increased ventricular pressure, okay, there will be the opening of these semilunar valves, okay? When these semilunar valves open, blood will start moving out of the ventricles, okay? So there's blood ejection, okay? So that's phase 4. So there's blood ejection from the ventricles. Okay. So that's phase 4. So phase 4 is going to be called ventricular ejection because is that blood ejection from the ventricles. The semilunar valves are open. Then there's also this opening is due to that increased intraventricular pressure. Okay. Okay. So now let's go to phase 5, the last phase of our cardiac cycle. Okay. So go to phase 5. Okay. So phase 5 is going to be called. So we have our phase 5 there, which is going to be called isovolumetric ventricular relaxation. Remember, phase 3 was called isovolumetric ventricular contraction. Now phase 5 is going to be called isovolumetric ventricular relaxation. Okay, so what do we have in this phase? Okay, so in this phase, you have the intraventricular pressure. So remember, we had increase in the ventricular pressure, which caused this the semilunar valves to open in phase 4. Okay, so here you find that the intraventricular pressure, because of the blood which has been ejected to the aorta, so that intraventricular pressure will drop. So there is drop in intraventricular pressure. Intraventricular pressure. Okay, so there is decrease in intraventricular pressure. Okay, now you will see that the aortic pressure will increase. Now there will be a lot of pressure in the aorta. So there is an increase in aortic pressure. Okay, because all the blood has been pumped into the aorta. Okay, so there is an increase in aortic pressure. Okay. So because of this increase in aortic pressure, it can cause the blood to go back to the ventricles. So we don't want that to happen. So there will be closure of your semilunar valve. Okay, so your semilunar valve will close. Okay, so will close. Okay, so That's what is happening in phase 5. Okay, so there's closure of that semilunar valve. You don't want your blood uh, to to go back to your ventricles. Okay, yeah. So those are the phases of your cardiac cycle. Okay, so from here it's a cycle. So you go back to where you start from. Okay, where the atria and the ventricles will still go back to diastole. Okay, so here the atria and the ventricles will go back to diastole. Okay, go back to diastole. They will be in diastole. Okay, there will be relaxation. And then the cycle will continue like that. Okay. So let me just show you a summary of the entire cycle. So this is a summary. So you saw the first phase was the resting phase, okay, where both the chambers were in relaxation. Then blood will enter both chambers, okay, the ventricle and the atria, okay. Then the second phase, you had atrial where the atria underwent contraction, okay. So that all the blood enters the ventricles, okay. Then from there you had the third phase, which is isovolumetric ventricular contraction, okay. So you saw here there was too much pressure in the ventricles, okay. So you saw how these AV valves close, okay, forming that first hand sound, okay. Then because of this pressure, increased pressure in the ventricles, you went into the fourth phase, which is ventricular ejection, where the semilunar valves were open, then blood entered the aorta, okay. Then there was also increase in pressure in the aorta, okay. So there you had your semilunar valves being closed, then you okay, so your meaning your intraventricular pressure dropped there, okay. Then the aorta and the ventricle the aortic pressure increased, okay. So then from there you went back to your diastole phase, okay, where you had both the atria and the ventricles being in diastole, okay. So uh, for today, we'll end here for this video. Now, if you want to, okay, so these are the phases of the cardiac cycle. Okay, so now for more topics, so if you want to learn more of these topics, you can subscribe with us. So let me just show you how you can subscribe with us. So you can open your web. So you can type on your web Discrete Learning Institute. Okay, you click on it. Okay, then you open like this. So you find different courses there. So you can enroll to the course you want. Okay, so let's say physiology. Okay, so I can come here. You create an account, then you pay for the course of your choice. So if you want physiology, you pay for physiology. Okay, so if you pay for physiology, you're going to find some other topics, okay. So you open that folder for physiology, you see something like this, okay. So here there are revision and past papers, okay. So they are recorded classes for revisions and also past papers. You find them in this folder, okay. You can also find other lessons for other topics and tutorials in this folder, okay. So you can just click there, you open, then you find these folders, okay. So there are notes. So if you want notes, you can go in the folder for notes. You find notes for the other topics you want, okay, like muscle physiology, nerve physiology, blood physiology, and so on and so forth, okay. Then if you want notes for if you want recorded classes, okay, so if you want recorded classes for the live classes we usually do, you can go to that folder saying recorded videos. So you find videos for these other topics, okay. So if you want let's say if you want cell physiology, you can go in the folder for cell physiology. then you find recorded classes for on cell physiology there. Okay, so these are some of the classes made on cell physiology. You'll find it. Okay, so you can subscribe with us and enjoy more of our live classes and also recorded classes. Uh, okay.